Hi, everyone. Hello. Okay, this is something completely different. We're not talking about Donald Trump. We're not talking about Israel or Gaza. We're actually talking about Parkinson's disease. Hi, everyone. We're talking about Parkinson's disease because April is Parkinson's Awareness Month. And I met a wonderful person who's doing a lot to bring attention to early onset of Parkinson's. Allie Signorelli is a nonprofit fundraiser and an event producer. She's also from Arlington, Virginia, like I am. And she was diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's disease 2 years ago in 2022. She was just 47 years old, and she has done tremendous things. I hope this is helpful for you all. Has done tremendous things to raise awareness, to really build a community and try to find purpose from what has been a really difficult diagnosis, obviously. So let me see if I can get Allie. Allie, hi. I am so
Hi.
sorry I'm late.
Oh
I
my
was
gosh.
running around and I didn't realize what the time was. And so I
No worries.
apologize for making you wait.
You're good.
And I thought first of all we should just start out by having you tell your story and what it was like to be 47 years old and hearing from your doctor that you had Parkinson's disease. How did this whole journey? I hate that word journey. I feel like it's so overused and so
Yeah.
cheesy now. But how did this start? What kind of symptoms did you start to experience? Tell
Yeah.
us your story.
Well, first, thank you for having me and for elevating this topic. I think it's so important. I was sitting at my daughter's soccer game and I noticed, I was 43 at the time, and I noticed a twitch in my ankle and I thought, that's weird. It looked kind of like a muscle spasm, but it didn't go
Mhm.
away for like 3 weeks. It didn't go away. And so when I was at my annual physical that summer, I mentioned it to my doctor, and she said, I'll never forget, oh, it's just a benign nuisance. It's a
Yeah.
nothing, right? Ignore it. But over the course of that year and the next 2 years, it just kind of progressively got worse. We had in my family a running joke about my big toe, which would thump. We called it Thumper. It would just
Because
kind
it would be
of
moving.
I would be watching TV and it would just involuntarily sort of be moving. And it was weird, but it wasn't terrible. And so I just kind of ignored it. But then over the course of the next 2 years, I started having a tremor in my entire right side, my arm, my leg, my foot, my hand, until I eventually couldn't type or write with this hand or grip anything. And we went to visit my daughter at college, and I was walking across campus and I noticed my right arm wasn't swinging.
Mm.
And at that point, I had been seeing a neurologist for a couple of years because it was no longer something I could ignore. And he had me do this series of weird tests, which are kind of like what I imagine you get put through if you get pulled over for driving impairment.
Right.
And then he walked out of the office and he left me in the exam room for almost 20 minutes. And I thought, I was texting my husband, I'm like, should I leave? Did he forget? Like, where did he go? And he came back in with a young associate who was taking notes, and he looked at the floor and then he looked at me and he said, Allie, has anyone in your family ever had Parkinson's disease? And that was the first time anyone had said that word. I never even Googled that word. It never even occurred to me. And he said, don't worry, you're young and it would be exceptionally rare, but I want you to go see a specialist. So,
But Allie, so this was after you having granted mild symptoms
mm,
for a couple of years,
for
for
4 years.
four
Yeah.
years.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so when you talked to various doctors, when you were getting physicals, when you would bring it up, no one even suggested this could be a possibility.
So I've learned since then that women often, it takes them much longer to be diagnosed. I wouldn't say that they didn't believe me because that would be unfair, but they definitely dismissed it as possibly other things. And I think giving them the benefit of the doubt, they don't want to give you that kind of lifelong incurable diagnosis. So they want to go through all of the battery of tests before that. So I had an MRI, I had a CAT scan, everything came back normal. Um, and yeah, it was just at that last moment where he finally said it, and then it sort of hit me like a ton of bricks.
Well, that
So,
brings me to a question. How is Parkinson's actually
good
diagnosed?
question.
Is there a way that you can say, that this is the early stage of Parkinson's, or is that not possible?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I was floored to learn that most people are diagnosed with just that set of physical tests. So you write on a piece of paper, you walk down a hallway, you touch your nose, you tap your fingers, and it's a clinical diagnosis. Um, in major cities across the country now, there's something called a DAT scan machine, which is sort of similar to like a CAT scan, except it's like it goes around your head instead of like in the machine.
Uh-huh.
And a DAT scan will tell you definitively whether or not you have Parkinson's. And I had a DAT scan, so there was no question that I had it. Answering your question about where we are in the stages, there are stages of Parkinson's, just like there are stages of cancer. I believe I'm in stage one, which is that my symptoms are managed fairly well with medications, and they sort of progress on more down the line. But yeah, I mean, it's just I couldn't believe that that's how most people are diagnosed, like this. It was
Right.
crazy.
Are
So.
scientists working on better ways, Allie, to figure out how you can predict that you are at the earliest stage of
Mhm.
Parkinson's? And even if they do that, I guess the question is intervention more effective when it occurs early in a diagnosis?
That's a really good question. The first answer is yes, they are working on it. In fact, I was with a doctor at a clinic in Florida yesterday doing a blood test, which they hope will help be able to diagnose and categorize where you are in your disease state. I don't know. That's a good question of whether being diagnosed early matters in terms of the progression. There is no disease modifying drug. There is no cure. There is only symptom mitigation. So that can be done with drugs, obviously. There's been sort of one gold standard drug since the 70s and not much else. I mean, there's been
And
others, but that's
is that
carbon,
L-DOPA? Is that what it's
carbidopa.
called?
Yeah, it's called carbidopa levodopa. And
Because
most
that's
people,
what my dad took. And I know my dad was diagnosed. I think you and I talked about this when he was about 80, and my husband had just died. And he was at my house, and his hand was he had tremors in his hand, and he kept on holding his hand with his other hand. And I said, Dad, are you okay? What's wrong? And he said, I'm just nervous. And I
yeah,
think he didn't want to tell me because it was so soon after my husband had passed away. But
yeah.
he was able to manage it pretty effectively. He died when he was 91. But I do know that it got progressively worse. And the window, I guess, where the medication works gets shorter and shorter.
Yes. Yeah. And so the first neurologist I saw was in the camp of let's hold off as long as we can so that you will have the medication later on when the disease progresses. My current neurologist flipped the script a little bit and he said, you want to have the years of your 40s and 50s be the most symptom free of your life, right? So if we're looking at hopefully 40 years of dealing with this, you want to be in this window feeling the best you can. So we decided to start the drug and we'll worry, in his words, about what that means for me later on. And hopefully by then there will be other treatments. There are other effective surgical treatments that have come up.
Are you
Sorry.
eligible for that?
Yeah, my neurologist feels it's a little too soon for me, that because I'm able to control my tremor, which again, for a lot of people, Parkinson's, manifests differently. So mine is tremor dominant, which means that's my main symptom along with a whole host of other ones. But deep brain stimulation would help with the tremor. He feels it's too soon. He said, let's wait and see, when you really need that. It's not without, it's major surgery. It's multiple surgeries. It's a lot of maintenance. There's a lot of stuff you can't do after you've had it. It's amazing and groundbreaking, and I know lots of people have had it, but not yet. Not yet for me.
Well, I don't understand. It's frustrating to me that they haven't come up with more medical options for people with Parkinson's.
Mhm.
And I know my hero and yours, Michael J. Fox, has raised so much money. I'm a big supporter of Michael J. Fox and the work of the Fox Foundation. But why haven't they been able to come up with more treatment options for people?
It's a really good question. First and foremost, the Michael J. Fox Foundation is amazing. When I met with them the first time and found out that they fund more in research than the United States government does, I almost fell off my chair. The truth is, I think that most people think of this disease and Alzheimer's disease as natural consequences of aging. And that the disease primarily only affects people like your dad who are, later ages of life. And so perhaps from the government standpoint, it hasn't been a priority. I think that's hopefully starting to change. But thanks to private organizations like the Fox Foundation, the research is happening. It's, I mean, you'll know this better than I will even, but, complicated and hard, and diseases are, especially of the brain, are almost impossible. I mean, I worked in the Alzheimer's space for 10 years,
I
so
know. I wanted to mention that you
yeah,
worked
it's,
at various brain health nonprofits,
yes,
ironically.
irony of all ironies. Yes, yes,
Right. And you know how painstakingly slow research sometimes takes, especially with brain and neurodegenerative diseases, diseases that start in the brain, because really it's only until it hasn't been until recently that we're able to use brain scans, because one of the problems with brain disease is you can't like get tissue samples of your brain, and I think that in many ways has slowed down medical research.
yeah.
What so you have formed this whole community, Allie. Tell me about, I know you have a blog, I know you have a very active Instagram following, which is wonderful. No, because I think it's so critically important that people feel supported and are talking to other people, even if it's family members, because these diseases don't just affect one person, they affect the entire family. So tell me a little bit about what you've done and how it's been helpful to you.
Yeah. Well, it's ironic that you mentioned family because that's really the reason I actually created that account, that separate account from my personal social media accounts. I found myself posting a lot about it in those early couple of months, and I was worried, especially about my kids having to see what had become a useful tool for me for sort of emoting.
Right.
I was worried that they would be forced to witness stuff that maybe they weren't ready to see. And so I wanted to give them and my parents and other people in my life the opportunity to sort of opt out. So you can see normal Allie or you can see Parkinson's Allie. You don't have to see both if you don't want.
And
That's
which is the handle where you talk and share and other people share about their
Yeah.
experiences with
So it's
Parkinson's?
I'm still Allie. Ha ha ha. Still play on words, but I'm still Allie. And at that same time, I was like very, very hungry for other stories, especially of younger women that had Parkinson's. I wanted to see more than just sort of a written like essay about life with Parkinson's. I wanted to see moms in the wild, if you will. Like I wanted to see
Yeah.
other younger women with it because I felt like if I could find, other people that had it that were doing well, I would be less afraid. And that's what it became. I met, I think the first person I met was a woman named Carrie Shaw, who's in Austin, Texas. She's a single mom, she's a mountain climber, and she introduced me to all these other women that had it that were in our 40s. And I instantly felt like, oh, I'm going to be okay. If they're okay, I'm going to be okay. And then it just kind of kept growing from there and there. I use it as a tell-all. I share the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I think people respond to that because they are going through it too, it just helps to see. Like I was sobbing on it the other day, and I was really embarrassed, and then I got hundreds of messages like I'm right there with you, and it's just a place for me to connect with people. So it's been good. It's been
There,
good.
absent of more medical options, there are things that can mitigate symptoms. I
Mhm.
know that they've done a lot of research on dance and
Yeah,
movement and kinds of things that you can do that may not medically slow down the progression of the disease, but can actually lessen the symptoms or even stave off some of the symptoms.
yeah,
Tell me about that.
yeah. So they say that exercise in particular is really helpful in slowing progression, high intensity interval training. The doctor I met with yesterday reminded me that strength training is also really important. I joined a Parkinson's rock climbing group, which has been, shown to help as well. There's an 83-year-old man named Erwin who has it that scurries up the wall and puts me to
Wow.
shame every time I'm there. So yeah, exercise, any kind of brain healthy lifestyle matters. So nutrition, stress reduction, all of the things they talk about. Sleep is particularly hard for people with Parkinson's, and they don't really know why. We
Mm.
have an insomniac club often in the middle of the night. But yeah, definitely exercise and dance. I haven't done dance yet. I'd like to. There's one at the Kennedy Center. There's a Parkinson's dance class at the Kennedy Center, so I'm going to take that at some
Oh,
point.
you should. You
Yeah, it'd be
should.
fun.
And I think also getting involved in helping other people must be great for
Yeah.
elevating your mood. And,
Yes.
you know, I don't know. I'm sure that that would be incredibly useful. Tell me about your symptoms today. It's been
Yeah.
you were diagnosed, as I mentioned, in
Mhm.
2022. So it's been about 2 years.
It's been a year and a half since I was diagnosed, and it's been about 5.5 years since almost 5 years since my first symptom. So, you know, the tremor comes and goes. I call it Trevor. He comes and goes. Um, some days it's not noticeable at all, and you would look at me and have no idea. And some days it's very noticeable. There's a lot of hidden symptoms of Parkinson's. I have a lot of pain. It runs sort of down my back and into my leg. And then, like I said, lots of people have other symptoms. Those are the main ones for me. And I would say the emotional part has been a lot. I think there's a lot of fear when you hear that you have something that's incurable, and
And
when you
anger, I
anger,
imagine.
frustration at slow progress. It's definitely an emotional roller coaster. But I have a good therapist,
Yeah.
so
And are you
I know.
meditating? Are you doing
Oh,
things like breathing
I'm so
exercise? And
bad at
I'm not good
meditating,
at
Katie.
meditating, but I do think, this mind body connection and doing certain things that reduce stress
Yeah.
probably, I don't, what do I know?
I,
I'm not a
I
doctor. I'm just,
well, I mean, I like to say that the action of reducing stress, like the idea of reducing stress, often stresses me out. So
yeah.
I just kind of go with it. I don't feel particularly stressed. The sleep thing is the hardest thing for me. And no, I'm not good at meditating. I wish I was. I can't sit there. And then it makes me even more anxious.
One thing
Actually,
I do is box breathing, which has helped me when I'm feeling super stressed. I'm kind of like you. I don't do much stress reduction work. I kind of thrive on stress because I'm crazy. But if you inhale for 4,
oh
hold for
yes,
4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, and you kind of imagine in your mind a rectangle
that's
or
a
a
good one.
box. Mine's usually a rectangle, I guess, because the breathing up takes longer than the holding it.
Ah,
But I find that to be super helpful when I'm feeling really
yeah.
agitated or
Well,
anxious.
and you can go snuggle that new grandbaby of yours. That will
Yeah.
help any day.
But he's all the way in Los
Oh
Angeles and
my,
I'm
I
back
forgot.
in New York, but I can FaceTime him.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, there's a national plan to end Parkinson's, and this is the first of its kind legislation to prevent and cure Parkinson's disease. By the way, I wanted to ask you earlier, do scientists know what causes Parkinson's disease, and is it genetic? That's something obviously I think about.
Good question. So it can be genetic. There is something in your brain, and I am not a doctor. I was a voice major in college, so everyone should do their own research. But there's something in the people who have Parkinson's brains called alpha-synuclein, and they are working to discover why some people get it and some people don't. I am not. I do not have the genetic makeup. I've had the full test. It came back negative. Some doctors believe it's environmental. I spoke with Dr. Dorsey last week, who believes it's a man-made disease primarily. Um,
Sorry,
my doc,
what did you say
he
about that?
that he believes that environmental toxins, man-made toxins, are a primary cause, which we
I
know
think
is
Michael
true.
talks about that. He
Yeah.
talks about like your genetics are the gun and
Hmm.
that environmental and the environment sort of, or things in the environment pull the trigger. So it's kind of a
Absolutely.
combination of both
Yeah.
of those things.
My first neurologist told me it may be lifestyle choices, which I don't love because then that puts sort of the weight on your shoulders that maybe you caused it yourself. But, I don't think they really know. And I think they're working hard. Obviously, the Fox Foundation has identified in a study found the biomarker.
Right.
So we're closer to understanding the answer to that question. I can't remember what
Oh,
your second question was.
my other question was this national plan to end
Oh, the national
Parkinson's,
plan. So
this
yes.
legislation.
Mhm.
What would that do, and how close are we to seeing that come to fruition?
Um, So the plan would be life changing, truly life altering. I was involved, obviously, in the Alzheimer's space when the National Plan for Alzheimer's was passed. It increased federal funding significantly for research. It invested in care and helped, underserved communities. So there's a lot that the plan would do. A similar plan for Parkinson's. It has made it. It sailed through the House. It passed almost unanimously in the House in December with widespread bipartisan support. It currently sits in the Help Committee in the Senate, which is co-chaired by Bernie Sanders. So we're very, very hopeful that he will put it forth for either a hearing or a markup
And
soon.
what would it do? Just devote more research
Yeah.
dollars?
So the first step would be that they would put a committee in place, and the committee would be made up of people living with the disease, representation from all forms of government, and that committee would come up with a plan and say, this is what we need. We need more money for research. We need care support for families and people living with it. They would develop the plan. And then, yeah, with the hope that it would pass and then become law and get to the White House. Hopefully it gets done before we have a change in Congress, because if it doesn't, as you know, it'll get thrown out and we'll have to start all over again. So
So
working with the Fox
frustrating.
Foundation to hopefully nudge our friends in the Senate to get it done for us. So
You know, one thing I wish the scientists could do, and we met through my friend Sandra Abrevaya, who's married to Brian Wallach, and you all, Brian Wallach. Brian is an amazing person, as is Sandra, and Brian has ALS. And we often talk about all these neurodegenerative diseases being attacked and having solutions because many of them overlap: ALS, Parkinson's, Huntington's disease,
MS.
Alzheimer's, MS. Many of these diseases could be really tackled in a much better way with more funding if they would be seen as sort of in a whole
Yeah.
group of diseases, right?
I mean, first of all, Brian and Sandra are like, I mean, when you talk about people changing the world, you don't find anybody more impressive than them. And their theory is if you solve one, you will solve them all. If we unlock the answer to ALS or Alzheimer's, we will unlock it to all of them. And so I agree. I think a rising tide floats all boats. So more money, more research, more investments in finding a cure. Parkinson's is the fastest growing neurodegenerative disease, but Alzheimer's and ALS and MS, I mean, these are critical issues that are facing almost all American families, either as patients or
Well,
caregivers. So,
wanted to ask you about caregivers. As we said in the beginning of our conversation, this is a huge stressor and burden, even though, nobody wants to have their loved one think that it's a burden. And it's not really a burden. That might not be the right word, but it's a huge responsibility to be caring for someone with Parkinson's, and it can take its toll on caregivers. I saw the toll it took on my mom, for example, when my dad was having trouble like tying his shoes and things like that. So what advice would you give caregivers, and are there resources for them out there?
oh, you're going to make me emotional. um, yeah, I mean, my husband is my absolute rock, and I am very, very lucky to have him. We met when we were 3 years old, so he invested very early, and I think
Wow,
yeah, yeah.
that's a long courtship,
It's
Allie.
a long courtship, Katie. I mean, I frankly, I went after him and didn't take no for an answer. But yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone wants to sign up for this or watch their loved one go through it. It's right now for us, my symptoms are fairly mild, and so for him, mitigating my emotional symptoms is the hardest part. I would imagine if you asked him. And yeah, I think caregiving is such an underappreciated role. It oftentimes caregivers suffer physical ailments, financial ailments. I mean, there's really a toll that is taken on caregivers, and there's lots of different organizations. One that I worked with closely prior to being diagnosed is HFC, which is Seth and Lauren Rogen's organization. They're primarily focused on Alzheimer's caregivers, but there's lots out there, and I'm happy to share some on my page. There's just people need support for sure, for
And
sure.
what and if people want to get more involved,
Yep.
I got a lot of questions, a lot of suggestions for certain therapies that honestly I can't really. I'm not a
Yeah.
doctor, so
Yeah. I'm not a.
someone asked, "Have you tried rock steady
Oh
boxing?"
yeah. No, everyone recommends that to me. I haven't yet. I just retired from working. I did 9 events last year, so this is the first time in my life that I haven't been a consultant. So I'm trying all new things. So rock climbing was first, but rock steady is on the list, and in
What
addition to
is that?
dancing,
What is rock
it's
steady?
like Parkinson's boxing classes for people with Parkinson's. And I signed up for one early on, and I got an email back that I was going to be the youngest person by about 3 decades, and I was like, I don't care, I think it'll be fun. So
Actually,
yeah.
someone did ask in the question section if you have found a good support group, and it sounds like you actually created your own.
I did. Yeah, I had a hard time connecting with support groups in the beginning because primarily they were older, frankly, and yeah, I just didn't. I'm not really a sit in a group and emote kind of person. I just prefer to do it in front of thousands of people
But
online. So
but you have met a number of
yeah.
people
Oh, I have.
who
Yes.
are in kind of the same boat you're
Yes.
in.
Yeah. Lots and lots of women my age, women and men, but lots of young people who found my page or I found theirs. And I get some tremendous support from the Fox Foundation. I have also from the Parkinson's Foundation, and then obviously my family and friends who have been amazing, in addition to the strangers. So yeah, I feel very supported. I'm not in a technical support group, but
Yeah,
I feel.
but I think you're right. I mean, one of the wonderful things about the internet, because there's a lot of terrible things about the internet and social media, but the aspect of connecting people who are in similar situations who need help, I think it's a miracle for so many people to be able to connect when they need to so badly. Ultimately, what is your goal with your advocacy work, Allie?
That's a good question. I really want to get this national plan passed. That would be meaningful to me. But then I just, I read somewhere that when you have walked through the dark, it sounds a little cheesy, but when you walked through the dark, that it's your job or your right or your honor to light the path for people to behind you. And I feel that way with this, that, when I felt like I was totally lost and everyone that I knew had the disease in their 80s and 90s, it was so meaningful to me to find other people like me. So I'm just going to keep sharing that this affects people like me too. Young people all over the country are getting it. People like Michael J. Fox and so many others. So that's my goal, just to keep
Someone else
sharing.
says the Big and Loud program in
Oh yes.
PT.
Yes, I did. My first neurologist signed me up for PT right away. There's Parkinson's specific PT. It's movement and voice. It's fantastic. So people should definitely check that
Well,
out.
Allie, I loved meeting you the first time. It's a real pleasure to have this conversation in front of a few hundred people. And no, no, no. And I know this is not new for you because you're doing this a lot on
Yeah.
your,
Yeah.
on your
I'm trying to be you.
Instagram
I'm trying to be
feed.
you, Katie. That's all. I'm just trying to live up to
Oh,
your
yes.
incredible standard.
Well, two Arlington girls
Yes.
trying to, you have to make the most out of a bad situation. And obviously, it wasn't me personally, although I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I
Yeah.
tried to use that experience to educate other people about getting screened and about getting additional screening if they have dense breasts. I just read an article in the New York Times about it. So
Well,
apparently
and
they're
not just
apparently
that.
they're reading my newsletter or following me on Instagram over at the New York Times because now they've written
Oh,
about it.
they're
But
stalking you.
I really appreciate everything you're doing. Any way we can help spread the word, especially this month, Parkinson's Awareness Month, please let us know. And you all can, if you miss this, you can sign up for our newsletter, which is Wake Up Call. It comes 6 days a week. You go to katiecouric.com. It has news and all kinds of helpful information and interviews with great people like Allie. So check it out.
Thank
Allie,
you.
good to see you. Maybe we'll
Good to
get to
see
meet in
you.
person.
Yes. Well, I'm going to be in New York for the Michael J. Fox Foundation meeting this week, but some
Oh,
other time we'll
let me
definitely,
know.
yeah.
Maybe we could
Yeah.
meet for coffee or
Yeah,
something.
that would be great. Thank you. Thank you for all you're doing and all that you've done. Stand Up to Cancer and so many examples that you've set for living out loud when you've been in a difficult situation. So
Well,
I see you
thank
as
you.
a role model too.
Thank you for saying that. Now I'm going to cry. Okay,
No
thanks
crying.
everyone. Again, Allie, see you
Bye. See you
soon. Bye
soon, Katie.
everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.